So I'm just going to introduce Tom real quick. So Tom AC1J is going to be doing our presentation tonight on Antheil Lamarr, and should be a good conversation, a good presentation. So I'm just going to hand it right over to Tom.
Oh, I'm all set with this. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. It's not often you get an applause before the talk. And I'm looking at my wife back there. My wife of almost 58 years. If I see this, or I see, or speed it up, or I'll probably get all kinds of. And I haven't given a talk now for a while. The last one was at the Kentucky Radio Club 4 years ago, just before COVID started, which something to remember, I guess, but it wasn't on this subject. This happened. I'm giving this talk tonight on Antheil and Lamarr, an unlikely collaboration for torpedo guidance that which really introduced spread spectrum communications 82 years ago. And this happened right around the time I was born, so I was not involved. However, when the subject came up on the net one night of Antheil Lamarr and what she did technically, which has gotten a lot of publicity in the last 20 years, I made a comment that I was quite familiar with the work that was done, and in fact that she collaborated with a non-blood relative, my uncle's, my aunt's, my mother's sister's husband's cousin from New Jersey. And I fondly remember my uncle, which I'll talk about. And I did have discussions with him before he passed away in 1997 about this whole thing. And he did give me some insight as to what he knew. And we'll be talking about that a little bit. So first of all, Antheil is an unusual name, kind of like Grubmuller, right? I don't want to pick on that. Maybe we should shut the recording off now. And it's a German name. Well, we'll get into the next, see if I can make this work. Page down doesn't work. Why is that? Okay, so I have to do this, I guess. Nothing's moving. Oh. Do we?
Must be a Mac.
All right. So on time, first of all, I want to say before I get into this, I don't endorse the lifestyle of either one of these people. This is that part of it I would rather, in some ways I'd rather not just talk about, but it is rather interesting what they did. And it's a fact that they contributed significantly to technology. The other things they did were, some of them were rather crazy, and some of it was maybe titillating to some people, because a couple of people asked me. So I'm going to throw up the most titillating part first here and get it out of the way, all right? And then you can go. So I was at an air show in Nashua a few years ago. Oh, not a few years ago, like 20 years ago, maybe 15, about 15 years ago. And I noticed a B-25 there. I noticed a B-25. And somebody made a comment that this was a representation of Antheil Lamarr from one of her movies. And if you look at that movie, and I've only seen a little piece of it, I never watched the whole movie, but it has to do with some activity in Africa and so forth, and some unscrupulous, I don't know, trade of some sort and whatnot. And she comes out of the darkness and she says, "I am Tandaleo." And so when I saw this on the aircraft, I thought, that's interesting. In fact, I wondered what Tandaleo was. And that's when I looked it up and found out. And then I found out I realized it was her. And I don't know, I won't elaborate anymore on that particularly, but at one time and I'm getting ahead of myself, which I do when I give talks, but she was considered one of the most beautiful women in the world. I find this interesting, by the way, because my mother was born the same year she was born, 1914. And a lot of the pictures, the hairdos and everything remind me of my mother. Not the rest of it, but not by any means, but she did, well, I'm going to get ahead of myself and I don't want to do that. So we'll just keep going here. And is that working now or okay? So Hedy Lamarr's real name was Hedwig Eva Maria Kiesler. Is that pronounced right, John? John's going to see, I told John's going to help me a lot with this because Kiesler, right. She was born in Vienna, the daughter of a very prosperous banker. And by age 10, she was a pianist, a dancer, and spoke 4 languages by age 10. And she enrolled in Max Reinhardt's drama school in Berlin. And as I already said, close friends called her, well, I didn't say this part, but close friends called her a genius, but the world only acknowledged her beauty for the most part. And she had 6 husbands, and there's a whole lot you could talk about this lady, but she lived from to the year 2000, so she was about 86 when she passed. And her first husband of 6, okay, a total of 6, the other 5 were all in the States after she came to the States, was Frederick Fritz Mandel. John might have heard of him. He was an arms dealer in Austria. He was a bad guy, but he was also very technical and had a lot of technical knowledge. And it's thought that she gained technical expertise from him, even though she was very unhappy there. She was very unhappy. She made a movie there that wasn't even allowed to be shown in the United States. I know some of you are going to say, what was it? No, I didn't bother to put the title in, but anyhow, yes, I did. I forgot. Okay. So it was called Ecstasy. Okay. And it was banned in the United States. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself again. Okay. And she made many, many films over a period of 28 years, 30 films, most of them in the United States. And the most famous one was Samson and Delilah in 1949. So we'll get back to Hedy some more as we go along here. But I probably put a little more emphasis on George than Hedy, only because of the relative situation, consequences. But so George was my uncle William L. Antheil Jr.'s first cousin. Now, I knew William L. Antheil Sr., who was George's uncle. He died in the 60s. He died after George died, and he was his uncle. I never knew George's father, however. And as far as I know, they were both shoe store owners in Trenton, New Jersey. Very well respected. Their word was their bond, was a story and all that. They were really, really good businessmen. And this was when shoes were still made and repaired in the United States, of course, which you can't find too much anymore. And so William L. Antheil Jr., a little aside, there was a school built in his father's honor, because his father, the man I knew, and the uncle of this guy, was on the school board for many, many years in Ewing Township, New Jersey. And even though he had very little education, he was extremely well respected because of his love for education and his devotion to students. And so it's kind of interesting, but the joke was that the school was the William L. Antheil Junior High School. So my uncle, the son of this fella, said it was really his school, William L. Antheil Jr. But no, the junior had a different meaning. It was a junior high school, like 6th to 8th grade or whatever. And so, but my uncle had a great sense of humor, and he died around 1997. So I got to talk about some of this about George with him. So my first remembrance of Uncle Bill, though, I just realized today, and I put this in here just for fun. I always say, well, I don't remember much about the war. There's a few of you that are about the same age as me, 81. Born in late 1942 in my case. So that's why I don't remember much about the war. But I do remember something that's kind of weird, but you would probably realize why I remember it. I got a sailor doll, little sailor stuffed doll, and it was shipped to me, and it was from my Uncle Bill, and he was in the Merchant Marine. And I think of Merchant Marine, I think of Tim. Where is Tim? Oh, okay. And because Tim was in that for a while, but anyhow, it's not really the Navy, but this little sailor doll thing was dressed like a naval sailor, okay? And the doll fell in the toilet. And yeah, I never thought of that. So he heard about it. Now, whether it went down the toilet or not, I don't know, or whether it was, we won't, enough of that. But anyhow, he felt bad for me, and he had another one shipped to me from somewhere in the North Sea. Now, you realize he was going back and forth with all these German submarines and stuff. So this sort of tangentially is related to this. It's just something, though, that I happen to remember that I guess you remember things that if you lose them or you gain them and they're really neat, you might remember something when you're 2 or 3 years old, but I couldn't have been more than 2. So anyhow, let's get back to this. So Uncle Bill, my uncle, was 20 years younger than George Antheil. And I asked Uncle Bill back in the 90s, after this came out about this invention and everything, which I'm going to talk about, I said, what was George like? Did you know him very well? He was born in Trenton, like you were born in Trenton, New Jersey. And he said, hardly ever saw him. He said he was in Europe, and then he was in Hollywood. But he said, I do remember one day he was, I remember him riding down a highway with a scarf flying, and he had and he was in something like a Cord convertible, which of course a Cord would be a very expensive vehicle back in the day, looking something like that, right? That's not the Cord, but I believe it's something like that, okay, that he was, and you could imagine that with the people he hung out with and everything, he could easily have had a car like that. So picture that back in the 30s. Uncle Bill was born in 1920, so he was old enough to remember that. So George Antheil, his family immigrated from Germany. He was born George Johann Karl Antheil. His father owned a shoe store, as I already mentioned, in the state capital of New Jersey, Trenton. There is a saying about Trenton: Trenton makes, the world takes. A lot of people don't stay in Trenton. George never graduated from high school or college. He was crazy about music, and so crazy about it that his mother sent him north from Trenton up into probably Ewing, or I forget exactly where, but up by the river somewhere, to get him away from the opportunity to play music, because he would play music where he lived and bother all the neighbors in the middle of the night. Now, where he grew up, though, in Trenton, when he was young, he was near a factory with lots of noises, all kinds of noise, and also next to a prison. Not a very nice environment, okay? But he used that in a lot of the music later on that he composed, okay? He used a lot of sounds. I have been to concerts, okay, where people knew nothing about Antheil and were playing his music on pianos. And, and I went up I remember one time I went up, it was over in Dublin, I went up and I said, I can tell you about this guy a little bit, But, so it's kind of neat. But anyhow, he went out to the country, went out to a farm, he was sent out there, he ordered a piano and they delivered it, it was like the washing machine at at Lowe's, I guess, I don't know. So he was influenced though a lot by this environment he was in, which is a rather weird environment. It's quite interesting to read. There's pages and pages of discussion about the environment he grew up in. Now, his brother Henry was a diplomat courier, and he died on the 14th of June, 1940, when his plane was shot down over the Baltic Sea. I don't believe he was the pilot, but he was his. So there was already a connection with World War II at that point, obviously, and the war was raging in Europe. As a young man, quite young, and as I'm going to show you later, one of the books he wrote an autobiography called The Bad Boy of Music, okay? And, but this was I hope you can see this. This was his conception of an orchestral instrument. And it says, playing, no, something of a violin and the thing to make it play, or to play it with, yeah. Now, so he didn't necessarily have a lot of respect for certain musical instruments, I guess. Or he had an interesting, a strange way of attacking the opportunities he had. Let's see now, why isn't this advancing? The bad boy. Yeah. Oh, you have to hit that first. Yeah, okay. Now, okay, can I actually start this? Oh, there we go. This is an example of his most famous composition from his early days. It's called Ballet Mécanique. And hopefully we'll have sound. Well, I can just describe this. This particular music was played with percussion instruments. And this is not him, obviously. This is much later. This is an orchestra in Philadelphia playing his music. And unfortunately, you can't hear it, but, or maybe you can if you turn the volume up there. No. All right. So you just have to take my word for it. There's like a 15-minute thing in here. I'm not going to run this for 15 minutes, but you can imagine it is. Okay. So it is very aggressive, very noisy. By the way, you often will hear George's music, not often, but occasionally on WCRB. Sometimes they play his music there, and you'll see it. His later music is all over the place. Okay, we'll go on. So these are a couple of clips here from. This is one where he's working at the piano, and then he had these noisemakers, okay, and that was actually used in Ballet Mécanique in 1922. All kinds of doorbells. I guess I think we would have fun making this stuff up. airplane propellers. He put a lot of airplane sounds in. Now, of course, there were no jets in those days. It was all propeller-driven aircraft, okay? But he actually had the sounds of propeller-driven aircraft and a lot of other things that made a lot of noise. But I don't know the technical term because I'm not a musician, but he would weave all these sounds into the music. And, well, yeah, somebody asked me that. It's sort of like Spike Jones, but more of a classical kind of thing. And yeah. Right, exactly. Yeah. So his first concert, he went to Europe, okay, and he spent a lot of time over there. His first concert was in London in 1922, so he figured at that time he was 22 years old. He met Bosky Marcus, niece of an Australian playwright, Arthur Schnitzler. And he had a penchant for Hungarian women. And he married her in 1925. I couldn't figure out whether he lived with her for a while or what in Paris, but he was in Berlin, he was in Vienna, and he was in Paris quite a long time. And he lived upstairs from something which was the Shakespeare and Company bookstore that was run by Sylvia Beach, who I guess is fairly famous from that time. And she had all kinds of connections with people like Ernest Hemingway, Ezra Pound, James Joyce, etc. And also these last two people here, Eric Satie and Darius Milhaud, who were composers, I think. But the other people were authors, famous authors. And maybe some of you recognize all these names. I don't know. I recognize some of them. But now his concerts, okay, were some of them were riotous. There's no other way to say it. People would go out in the streets afterwards, and it was just particularly in Paris. He would put a pistol on top of the piano, and he'd fire the pistol while he was doing the concert. People went pretty crazy over some of the stuff that he did, but of course it would get you riled up, I guess, because of the percussion kind of sounds and everything. Then he arranged to go to Carnegie Hall in 1927. And I believe he went back to Europe again, but he made a trip over and he went to Carnegie Hall and he gave something called a jazz symphony. And he had the noisemakers, but it didn't go over too well, apparently. And I won't go into, you can read about details of that, but it didn't go too well. I would say probably Benny Goodman's concert in 1939, I think it was, went a lot better, even though that was out of line with what they normally do or did at that time in Carnegie Hall. And so so George left Europe in 1933 because political tensions were increasing rapidly and the Nazi Party was taking control. And so by 1936, he wound up in Hollywood. And I think there was an interim period where he was back home with his mother for a while in Trenton, or mother and dad. But I'm not sure the exact time frame there. But then when he went to Hollywood, he met many people like Cecil B. DeMille, all these actors and actresses, okay? And this is a list which I won't read. Well, maybe I should, because maybe you can't see it that well, but these are all the movies that he made scores for. And some of them are quite famous. Some of them I'm not sure I'd want to watch. Some of them I never heard of, but something like The Buccaneer, The Plainsman, I believe. There was some others. There were others that were fairly famous, and he by then he had toned down his music quite a bit. It wasn't as loud and confrontational as it had been when he in the earlier years. But and these aren't in the order, by the way. The range is all the way from 1935 to 1957, I think. And I put these in today. So he was quite busy. He was quite busy, and no doubt he made quite a bit of money as well doing this. And he got to know all the big names during the top years of Hollywood activity. You know, the golden years, or whatever you want to call them. This is one of the albums that's available. Has some interesting names. These are earlier things though he did, not the stuff in Hollywood. Symphony Number 1, Zingoreska. I don't know. Somebody else can pronounce this probably better than me. Suite from the Capital of the World, McConkey's Ferry. Now I know where McConkey's Ferry is, on the Delaware River. It's right. It's right near where Vivian grew up, right? Just down the river a little ways, right? Nocturne and Skyrockets. Can you imagine what that must sound like? Nocturne and Skyrockets. And the Golden Bird. I don't know. So that's just a few of them, but these were the earlier things he did. Not these weren't part of these movies. So now we get into the story here. Lamarr first met Antheil at a dinner party in 1940. And they started talking about a system for synchronized control. And Lamarr didn't have a detailed knowledge, but Antheil had done some attempted synchronization of pianos, where he tried to synchronize 16 pianos. And I guess he wasn't terribly successful, but he was into player pianos as well as, you know, just playing the piano. And so they started discussions, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail of what they did because, first of all, I don't have the detail, but I suppose you can read the patent in detail if you like to read patents. Supposedly the patent wasn't written very well, by the way. Patent lawyers sometimes don't really get it. A couple of the patents that I got, where it was best, is where they got and went in the lab and actually saw and handled the equipment. And there they actually, they got it because they understood it. But if you just describe it in words, they'll take your words and turn it into something you won't even recognize. Anyhow, this is a picture of, obviously, Hetty in the center there. The people at the two ends are not identified. Bosky is the lady, this lady here. And of course, that's George. He wasn't a very tall fellow. Looks like Hetty had about 6 inches on him. But this was taken in somewhere out there in Hollywood. You can see you can kind of get a guess of what the time frame was. It was you see the car there, and it obviously was a car built in the 30s. It was before the, you know, well, probably around 1940 or 41. So the problem that they addressed was that German U-boats were consistently and easily jamming the Allied radio guidance systems used for torpedo targeting and making them ineffective. And particularly, the one thing that really bugged them was one particular incident was a sinking of the SS City of Beignet, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but a British passenger ship in 1940, killing 262 people. Of course, there was a lot of this stuff going on at the time, including these merchant ships as well that were taken down. But so Lamarr and Antheil developed a frequency hopping scheme using 88 frequencies. 88, I wonder why. I asked our lady Jean, our new ham Jean that's on the net at the last meeting. She's not here tonight, but I started to tell her a little bit about this, and I said there were 88 frequencies and I wonder why. And she immediately got it. She says, piano, you know. So, so, but anyhow, they had 88 frequencies, and this would allow avoiding detection. Now, the frequency hopping wasn't as fast as today's frequency hopping that's used for cell phones and things, okay? But what was sad is I've seen a picture too, and I don't know where that picture is, where the Navy rejected the, they claim they could make this roughly the size of a pocket watch, which is pretty small when you think about it. I'm not sure how they made it that small because there were no transistors in 1943. And the Navy said no. They just flat out said no, even though the patent was in progress, or maybe the patent had already been issued, I'm not sure, but they said no. And they said, we're not going to attach a player piano to a torpedo. They believed that this thing projected the idea of a player piano with a tape with all these hopping, you know, sequence, much like the old tape we learned Morse code with, if you've been around long enough, like I have. But the Navy said, no, we're not going to do that. And they suggested to Hetty, since she had ties with the Nazis way back, or that her former husband had ties with the Nazis at least, that she should just smile and do USO shows and to raise money for the war effort. Forget about this stuff. And supposedly, and I have read somewhere else, and I didn't try to dig that out for this talk, but she did have something to do with some other inventions as well. Not with George Antheil, but she really had a desire to do that sort of thing and not be this, I guess you would call a sex symbol or something in the movies. She really desired to do, you know, being like an engineer almost. So, oh, this is what the patent looked like, not the words, but and you can see this thing here that looks like a tape, like a player piano tape, and certainly that would confuse the jamming if this thing's hopping around. And but it wasn't accepted till much later. It was used in 1962 for communications in the Cuban Missile Crisis, which some of you will remember. But they didn't benefit from that. Well, Antheil was already deceased, and the patent had run out because, as you know, patents are good for 17 years. And so the patent had recently expired, and now this technique in a broad sense is used all over the place: Bluetooth, cell phones, Wi-Fi, GPS, and other things as well. And I think even if you really want to stretch things a little bit, you know, I was reading in the latest QST about FT8, and even some of that sounds like this sort of thing when you look at these matrices of. It's not the same thing, but it's sort of like it. And so the technique became, you know, about 20 years ago, there started to be a big recognition of these folks, particularly Hetty, because of the desire to recognize women in engineering, for example, and women in technology and just anything related to that. And she was being publicized all over the place and in technical magazines. And I don't know whether any of you've ever seen, have any of you ever seen any of this about Hetty Lamarr? Or yeah.
I can't say I remember any specific article.
Oh, okay, okay. So this is all, this isn't like something you all know about. Okay, good. Uh, so, um, we're almost done. I don't know how we're doing on, yeah, okay. So, yeah, so the technique was finally used in the 50s and 60s for secure military devices. I'm not sure what was done in the 50s, but I found some evidence that something was done in the 50s. And so it's so posthumously for code division, multiple access, and coded orthogonal frequency division. And I know some of you know more about this than I do. However, there is evidence that there was some work done in the USSR back as far as 1935 with Professor Dmitry Vasily. I'll just leave it Vasily Agave. I don't know. Maybe could you say Agave? Yeah. Have you ever heard of him or no? Okay, just wondered. Yeah. You helped him, right?
How long it takes from the development of the technology
Right,
to its embracing by the industry.
right, right. So now we have things like software controlled cognitive radios and all that sort of thing. And some of you have done a lot of experimentation with that. And they finally were inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame in 2014, which was 100 years after Hetty was born and 114 years after George was born. George only lived to be 58, but most of the pictures you see, he's smoking, so that might have been part of the reason. Died of a heart attack in 1959. Hetty was quite a character. One of the things she said was that you should spend all your money, spend your money. Not spend all your money maybe, but spend your money. Near the end of her life, I remember hearing something about her in the news where she was shoplifting. Now, whether she had to shoplift or whether she just thought, well, I'm Hetty Lamarr, I can help myself to stuff, I don't know. But of course, now shoplifting, I guess, is not a crime, but it is kind of sad when she lived to be, I guess, 86. So, but one of the things that was noted was that her children, she never spoke about her inventions to anybody, at least publicly, apparently. George did, but anyhow, if you want to do more reading, there's some books. I have 3 of them here. The Antheil one, The Bad Boy of Music, which is quite interesting. I've also heard an interview by him, which was very close to when he passed away. And it's quite an interesting interview. It's sort of like a whole treatise on the 20th century or something. Of course, the 20th century wasn't over, but his experiences in Europe and all that, it's quite interesting to listen to. Then there's this book called Hetty's Folly, and there's a torpedo that she's taking a ride on here, and then another one on the spread spectrum, and actually, I mean, the talk could go on for hours. There's lots of very interesting information, but in the details, but and the thing is, when you start to really dig into this, it just keeps coming. You go online and put their names in, and so if you're interested in reading more about this, I would suggest first of all you just go online. You can get these books as well, though, like from Amazon, and it is quite fascinating that this collaboration took place in the middle of all this Hollywood, filmmaking activity. So I guess that's it. If there's any questions.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Tom? At home people. Is there any questions for anyone on Zoom for Tom? I see some thumbs up from Barry. I'm not seeing any questions. So, oh, actually, was that a clap, Lori, or was that a question? Looks like a clap. So,
It was a clap.
excellent. Very good. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that, Tom. And like Tom said, he gave us some resources so we can look deeper into the story, as it were, there. But oh, actually, there is a question. Yeah, I'm gonna play it when the Zoom drops. I'll make sure it goes over the speakers. Yeah. No, it's okay. I just want to do this. Go ahead.
I was under the impression that she was working with the US government, and I don't know where I got that from, but I don't know that the connection between Hollywood that gets them into the US government so that they could do the work that they were doing, because I understood she did high math. And I didn't know how that
High level mathematics. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if I ever saw that. I think some years ago when I was looking at this, I did see some, like I mentioned, there was some other work done, but I don't remember what it was, and I'm not sure where I found that. I spent a little bit of time trying to find that, but since I only had a few weeks to prepare this, yeah. That's possible, because she was considered her close friends said she was very, very intelligent. Yeah, I don't know what her IQ was and everything, but yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions for Tom? Is there a question in the back? Nope, I see no questions back. Yeah, well, very good. Thank you very much again, Tom, for the
Thank you.
talk.